Hi, I'm Jo from the London Nutritionist, and I'm also the author of the low-fad diet. Today I'm in my clinic, so welcome. I'm going to be talking today about food and mood, how what you eat can affect the way you feel. The food and mood workshop that I do is by far and away the most requested workshop that I do. It's also Stress Awareness Month, and we've got Mental Health Awareness Week coming up, so I thought it'd be a really appropriate thing to talk about. Now, what we eat can affect how we feel in all sorts of surprising ways, from metabolic pathways to our associations with birthday cake. So I'm going to be exploring these in a bit more detail. Food and mood are closely related, whether it's because you feel irritable because you haven't eaten for a while, or because you need something comforting at the end of a really hard day. The two things are really difficult to separate. We have a couple of things going on here. On the one hand, we've got the psychological prop of having something comforting to eat, and on the other hand, we have the biological need for nutrients. Both are really important. I'm going to tell you a little bit about brain chemistry now. Now, there's lots and lots of ways that what you eat can affect your brain chemistry, but I'm just going to pick on a couple of them. And first, I'm going to talk to you about serotonin. Serotonin is often called the happy hormone, although because it's a chemical messenger in the brain, it's actually a neurotransmitter. Serotonin, amongst its other functions, has a role to play in learning and memory and social interactions. It's made from an amino acid from a dietary protein called tryptophan. Some foods also contain serotonin, so bananas are famous for this. However, when we consume dietary serotonin, unfortunately, because of the way our bodies are set up, serotonin can't cross the blood-brain barrier. So it doesn't matter how much serotonin you eat, it will never cross over into the brain. Eating tryptophan-rich foods won't increase your serotonin levels either, unfortunately. But there is another really interesting trick that you can do. Normally, all of the amino acids that you eat are competing for passage through the blood-brain barrier into the brain. So they all cross over at the same rate. But if you eat protein with carbohydrate, what happens is, as insulin is released in order to get the carbohydrate out of the blood and into the cells where it can get converted into energy, it also triggers the uptake of all the other amino acids to the muscles, leaving tryptophan free to cross the blood-brain barrier all by itself without the big traffic jam. So eating protein and carbohydrate together can actually improve your mood. As well as brain chemistry, brain structure also plays a role in how we feel. Each of our brain cells has a high component of omega-3. So this is a type of fat that our body cannot make and we have to get from our diet. It's found in foods like oily fish, nuts and seeds, and it's also in omega-3 eggs, and you can get it from supplements as well. If we don't have enough of it in our diet, our body has to substitute and use other kinds of fats. But it's thought that omega-3 is particularly good because it's quite fluid at body temperature, which means that neurotransmitters are able to get through the cell surface and into the cell where they can be used properly. Now, it seems that serotonin levels inside brain cells go up when we have enough omega-3 to make the cell structure. So the next thing is to talk about brain fuel. So you cannot have a good mood if your brain has no energy. And for the most part, the brain really likes to run on glucose. If it doesn't have enough glucose, it can make you feel irritable and grumpy, as some people will find if they haven't eaten for long periods of time. If you get too much glucose in the blood, what can happen is it can damage the small blood vessels in your eyes, kidneys and nerves. And as a response to that, to protect those small blood vessels, your body releases lots of insulin all at once. Now that brings blood sugar crashing down. So we've got a sugar spike followed by a sugar crash. Now initially, during the sugar spike, your brain's having a great time, loving all that sugar, but then afterwards in the sugar crash, it suddenly just gets starved of all of its favourite fuel. Now, if you eat low glycemic index carbohydrates, things like whole grains and fruits and vegetables, beans, lentils, chickpeas, granary breads, things like that, what can happen is you get a much more gradual rise of blood sugar, but your body is getting a constant stream of sugar that feeds the brain exactly what it needs, without any spikes followed by crashes. And that can keep your mood nice and steady. There's also the psychological aspect of food and mood. So food plays a lot of roles. So yes, it's for fuel and nutrients, but but also we use it for celebration and bonding and pleasure and creativity and all of these other things which are actually non-mechanical and non-biological. Now, it's impossible to separate the two things out. So when we're talking about food and mood, we have to look at the psychological aspect as well. So on the one hand, we have food as a really celebratory thing, like birthday cake, for example, or feasting at the end of a fast. And those have really positive connotations. But on the other hand, we have food as a stressor. So we have things like, have I eaten too much? Is what I ate for lunch healthy? Is my child getting enough vegetables? Why am I always hungry? And on that point, you end up with food being really negative and can have a really big impact on how we feel. Your relationship with food really depends a lot on your perspective, but here is a scenario that plays out really commonly in clinic. Somebody will say to me, oh, I had a really awful day at the office, it was so bad, so I decided I'd go and cheer myself up by getting some cake in the afternoon. It made me feel better at first, and then afterwards I felt so guilty and ashamed and wish I hadn't had it, and I actually felt a bit sick as well. So there we have two things mixing together, the biological part and the psychological part. So originally the cake was eaten as a comfort, as a treat, as a reward for having got through a horrible day at work. But because it's refined carbohydrate, what happened is there was probably a sugar spike followed by a crash, which we heard earlier can affect mood. But also it ceased to be a comfort at all and became a torture. So instead of being a treat where you can feel better about something, it ended up making you feel worse, and that's a bad relationship with food. What we really want is to be able to eat things for pleasure and enjoy them and not feel bad about it afterwards. So food and comfort eating is really tricky, and actually reading about mindful eating and things like that will really help you get on top of this relationship. But as a general guide, I like to say, instead of treating yourself with food, treat yourself well with food. So by adding that extra word in, we've changed it from it sort of being a treat, a reward, something naughty or bad, and it takes it into the realm of, actually, I'm going to do something really good for my body. And sometimes that will be cake, because cake is delicious and tastes good and is amazing, and the place across the road does something that's so good, and you can feel good about that decision, definitely. But if you know that getting a slice of cake is actually going to lead on to you feeling really awful, then perhaps treating yourself well with food might be going and spending a little bit extra on really amazing ingredients, or it might have nothing to do with food at all and going and getting yourself a massage. So treating yourself well is what we want to aim for, and that way you can feel good about the food you eat instead of feeling bad. So we can see that the psychological aspect of food is really important when it comes to our mood. If you like this video, it would be great to see you here again, so please subscribe and like it if you found it useful.